Hello. Today we will look at another poem by one of the most charming poets in the Tang Dynasty, Wang Wei. I say he is one of the most charming poets because he excelled at many art forms: poetry, calligraphy, painting, and music. Although his paintings and music are pretty much lost after these 1300 years, we could still find a lot of clues of his ideas of painting and music in his poems. We have so far learned 4 of his poems. We have 杂诗,来日绮窗前,寒梅著花未, and we have learned 相思,红豆生南国,春来发几枝, and we have 9月9日忆山东兄弟,独在异乡为异客,每逢佳节倍思亲. And finally we have 送元儿使安西,劝君更尽一杯酒,西出阳关无故人. These are all regarded as among his most famous and popular individual poems. I say individual poems because as a poet, Wang Wei's highest achievement and what he is most famous for is poems in another category, writing about sceneries, mountains, rivers, lakes, countryside, etc. He was one of the most important founders of this genre of poetry, describing nature's beauty in a consistently simple but also sophisticated way. Simple in language, but sophisticated in meanings and scope for meditation and imagination. One more thing which is highly relevant to the style of his poetry is that apart from studying poetry, Wang Wei was a devout practitioner and scholar of Buddhism. Before we discuss this further, there is another interesting cultural point from ancient China that we need to talk about. Apart from their surname and given name, ancient Chinese poets often have an alternative given name that people can refer to and call them with. This alternative given name in Chinese is called 字. So they have a surname, 姓, a given name, 名, and an alternative given name, 字. This alternative given name is different from the middle names of Western people. It is pretty much independent and regarded as equal to the usual given name, rather than auxiliary. For example, Li Bai's surname is Li, the given name is Bai, and his 字 is Tai Bai, so we can call him Li Bai or Li Tai Bai. Du Fu's surname is Du, and given name is Fu, and his 字 is Zi Mei, so we often call him Du Zimei. And Wang Anshi's surname is Wang, and given name is Anshi, and his 字 is Jiefu, so we can call him Wang Jiefu. In fact, to a certain extent, we often prefer to use their alternative given name when addressing them because somewhat the given name, the Ming, is more formal, and this alternative name is more casual. Anyway, we were talking about Wang Wei, and his given name is Wei. And what is his alternative given name? What is his 字? Because he was so much into the literature of Buddhism, he was totally obsessed with one of the canonic works. It's called Vimalakirti Sutra, which in Chinese is translated as 维摩诘经. And 经 means scrolls of canonic works. And 维摩诘 is a name of the protagonist in this piece of work. So Wang Wei was so obsessed with this book, and he chose this Mo Jie as his alternative name. So his given name and alternative name, when linked together, is this Wei Mo Jie. Wang Wei's understanding and appreciation of Buddhism idea were really deep, and it was often reflected in his poetry. When he described things, almost effortlessly and probably subconsciously, he would create a sense that contained some essence of Buddhism ideas. And because he was also a distinguished painter, his poems often feel like a masterful painting. That's a reason that people often say there are paintings in his poems and poems in his paintings. So today we are going to look at such a poem, one of his best-known poems in this genre. One extremely simple and elegant, but could provoke a lot of thoughts and appreciation. Its title is 鹿寨. Lu means the animal, deer, and here is just a name. Zhai is usually pronounced as chai, but here it should be pronounced as zhai. It means some fenced encirclement. And Lu Zhai is actually the name of a place. It's called Lu Zhai because there were a lot of deer around. Wang Wei at that time bought a big estate under a mountain not too far from the capital Chang'an. He then spent a long time in that estate, resting, drinking wines, appreciating the scenery, and writing poems. The name of this estate is called Wangchuan. It is still around today, and it's a town near the city of Xi'an. So this is Xi'an, right? So Wangchuan is around here. For reference, this is Beijing. And there were many interesting sites for sightseeing in that big estate. And Wang Wei would go from place to place and write poems about them. In total, he wrote 20 such poems, all short pieces of 五言绝句. He then compiled them together into an album, Wangchuan Ji. Ji means album, and Wangchuan obviously is the name of his estate. And Lu Zhai is one of those sites. So these are the 20 poems that he wrote when he included in this album. Let's now read this poem together. 鹿寨，空山不见人，但闻人语响。返影入深林，复照青苔上。You can see the language is really simple. Except for a few characters, most of the poems are pretty self-explanatory. 空 is empty, 山 is mountain, 不 is not, 见 is to see, 人 is people. So this line means that in the empty mountain, there is nobody to be seen. This Lu Zhai is probably in the mountain. Dan means but, only. Wen is here. Ren is people. Yu is to speak. And xiang is the sound. Although there is no one to be seen, we can hear people talking. The next line is also straightforward. Apart from this character, Ying, well, it is usually pronounced as Jing, meaning sceneries, but here is equivalent to another word, Ying, meaning shadows. And here this Ying means the sunlight, or the shadow of the sunlight, i.e. the remaining of the sunlight, implying this is near the evening. Fan means to return, and ru is enter, di, shen is deep, and ling is forest. So this line is saying the returning sunlight enters the deep forest, and then what? They 复照青苔上. Fu means again, once more. 照 is to shine upon. 青 is green. 苔 means moss. And 上 is on. So the sunlight is shining upon the green moss. You see, it is a very simple sight that Wang Wei was describing in his very simple language. Quiet, peaceful, and pleasant. But there is a lot of subtleties to be appreciated here. First, I said before that Wang Wei was also a musician, so he was good at using sound as decoration to describe things. The place must be very calm and quiet because it is 空山, empty mountain. But there must be people around, so we can hear them. In fact, the sound of these people make the quietness of the surroundings more prominent, doesn't it? This is a use of contrast to make a point. It set the mood and the tone, bringing the readers into a cleverly crafted scene with peace and a very relaxing mind. But the sounds from the surroundings add liveliness to the scene, so it's not that kind of creepy dead silence. Once the mood is set, the painter quality of the poet is thoroughly shown in the next two lines. The forest is deep and thick, but the sun, before setting, could still find some gap in between and shine through upon the vividly green moss. It's a rather vibrant color, and indeed looks like a painting, doesn't it? Again, it's some kind of contrast, the dark and shadowy forest in contrast with bright and penetrating late sunlight. This time is the visual contrast. And together, While the poem plainly portrays a lovely scene, if we still think about it and read beneath the words, there are indeed a lot of Buddhism ideas in the poem, aren't there? Now, here everybody could have their own take, but to me, there are a few things that I can relate to. It shows the calmness of one's heart, even surrounded by noises. Even if there are noises of people chatting, it could still feel quiet and peaceful. It shows the quality of persistence. The sun has been rising and then setting, and most of the time it is shielded and cannot get through the forest. But ultimately it succeeds at a time when it is actually the weakest, near sunset. It finds a way to shine through. And it also shows that even the most insignificant beings could have its moment of highlight, such as the green moss, the qingtai, the most common and insignificant plant in the forest. It could also be shone upon by the sun. And when that happens, it is such a delightful sight. All these Buddhism ideas could be borrowed to explain and even guide people's real life. They are very subtle, but once you understand it and can think further yourself, you will find that they are very powerful and worth reading over and over again. Many other poems in the Wang Chuanji album are like this. Underneath the simple language, there is much subtlety to be dug and appreciated. One thing to add is that Wang Wei was not alone when he was touring around that big estate. He was often with one of his best friends, who is called Pei Di, who was his colleague and fellow poet. And each of the 20 places, this friend also wrote one poem. So this album, Wang Chuanji, is really made up of 40 poems, 20 by Wang Wei and 20 by his friend. While it is widely acknowledged that Pei Di's poems are not as good as Wang Wei's, they're also very enjoyable. For your interest, this is what Pei Di wrote on the same place, Lu Zhai. He wrote, 日夕见寒山，变为独往客。不知深林寺，但有君家记. This poem is basically saying, when the sun is setting, I see the cold mountain, and I walk there myself. I don't know about what used to happen there, and can only see the trails of some deer. I think it's also a pretty good poem. What do you think? That's all for today. Thank you.